Welcome back to Conversations for the Good. Good morning, Dr. Jane.
Good morning, Anna. How are you today?
I'm doing great. And well, this is our 29th episode. Can you believe that?
Oh, that's amazing. That's
It is.
amazing.
It really is. And we've put out a great deal of information and many accompanying techniques. I'm wondering how we can make the best use of the content of our conversations.
Well, Anna, you're really posing a great question because sometimes we put, and I'm guilty of this myself, we put more effort into kind of perusing and collecting information and really ignore the possibilities of utilizing, taking action with it. And I can't recall who said it. I think it might have been Leo Buscaglia. It was decades ago. But the quote is, knowing and not doing is not knowing. And it really is, it's like, what's the point?
Mhm. Yeah, it seems to me that the gathering of information is most useful if it's directed toward improving oneself or helping one another and making a better place for all of us.
Oh, sure. I mean, information in the service of self or others. I mean, and also accurate information. This is all the ingredients for any change process. Whether the change is big or whether it's small.
Mm. Yeah. And it really, if you think about it, that's what's so compelling about why and how we started the conversations in the first place. The pandemic forced so many changes, and people were in such heightened reactivity and making the shifts to accommodate all those changes. It felt a bit crazy for many of us.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. You and I have talked so very often about how the information in the episodes really goes beyond, what we've been experiencing in the pandemic. It's really directed toward, what's happening to me? What's happening to me in my life, in my relationships, and what do I have control over? Thoughts, feelings, because there's a lot that we don't have control over. And then it's about being able to identify my reactivity, what's triggering it, and can I own it? And then we go from there to, can I really be responsible for my choices? Do I know why I'm making certain choices and are they helpful for me? And what might I do to support myself and others through any kind of difficult process? And other questions, involve, looking at my habitual patterns. Are they helpful? Are they obsolete? Are they hurtful? And what do I need to do? What's that first step that I can take that will move me in the direction of making things different, which is the change process?
Hmm. Yes, when I let that sink in, these are real life lessons, a gift to discover something about ourselves that we do when we're too busy and distracted to notice before. And maybe for some people, that information we have offered is a starting point for change.
Yes, and think about it. Too busy, too distracted. That it's like, what's going on in my life? What's going on in my life that I'm too busy to turn toward myself? And yet, we're all guilty of it. I don't want to make it sound like it's horribly bad, but it really interferes with the possibility to do things differently. Because I'm someplace else. I'm really not um, um, in the here and now, so that I can start a change process. And it gets in the way of, obviously, if I don't know what to do, I'm not going to be able to take action.
Yeah, we know we've touched on the change process in a couple of our conversations, and I know we'll be delving in more deeply in our future waking up episodes. But for now, let's explore how we can get it moving and what gets in the way.
Sure. Let's start with talking about how we create a field of change. And I use field as a really kind of an indication that there are elements that show up and that we can discover that highlight and energize kind of the need for change, the purpose of change, really our desire to change. And it's important to know what triggers this kind of awareness and how does it become important enough for me to actually take action? What vitalizes not only the desire, but then the capacity to make something different happen. I remember hearing so often in the 12-step programming, You know, when they talked about initiating change, there was an old saying: when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, you'll take the option to do it differently. And this sometimes is that willingness that shows up, kind of moves us in that direction of action.
So when things get bad enough, change becomes a good idea.
Well, at least it becomes an idea. I mean, sometimes we frame it as good, sometimes we frame it as bad, but there are certainly internal and external influences that can excite or inhibit this change process. A simple example of an internal influencer is, uh, that we tend to be more energized when our thoughts are moving in a positive direction, versus kind of the disruption of negative thought patterns. We referred to this negativity back in earlier conversations as the aversion mode, and in our conversations, we talked about how negative thought patterns really impede, really get in the way of the creative process of change. And it's important for us to really frame any change process as a creative process. Because when you think about it, we're creating a new way of operating in life. It requires, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual energy to move it in that direction. And it is a creative process, creating new dimensions, hopefully more life enhancing dimensions to our lives.
This is a really different way to look at it. And everything has energy. All of our input and efforts have energy, positive, negative, or neutral.
Yes, and let's start at the beginning, because I often think of us as really living our lives in a tunnel of our beliefs and our conditioning. Um, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad or wrong. It's just that it's habitual. We don't think about it. We're just kind of almost robotic in how we live our lives. It's usually from our backstory, and it dictates, what we do, what we don't do. So the choices in our lives very often are based on old conditioning, and the pull to change is very disruptive to this life in the tunnel, this tunnel life. Um, and as I've mentioned before, very often we enjoy variety or some innovation in our lives, but real change is often resisted big time.
Well, I'm curious about what instigates change. It seems to me, given my experiences, it can come out of wanting something better, or a health crisis, or to please someone else.
Oh, nice job, Anna. I mean, you you really nailed it. And as I've said, there are internal and external influences or pulls for change. Oftentimes we recognize the need for change long before we take action, which is an interesting piece, isn't it? There's a lot of resistance in the tunnel. There's a lot of kind of keeping us kind of pulled in place. And sometimes the situation has to become urgent or even a crisis before we become willing to take action. This is that sick and tired of being sick and tired phenomenon.
Yeah, almost like we no longer have a choice. We must do something and do it like now.
Yes, and even then, action isn't always consistent. I mean, there's some research studies of patient compliance with treatment for chronic um, conditions, health conditions like diabetes, asthma, cardiovascular issues, obesity, that indicate that as many as 90% of all patients with these diagnoses don't follow prescribed nutritional, lifestyle, or even pharmacological recommendations by their treating physicians.
What keeps people from making the healthy choice? I know personally, I know change is hard and it's difficult to stick with the plan sometimes.
Well, that's right in many respects. There are a myriad of reasons why people don't take action. Some of them are very obvious, and some are really not understood, and it's mainly because they're unconscious. So holding on to the importance of why we need to change can be really slippery, or sometimes non-existent. So it's important to understand that habits die hard. They have a life of their own. And is our conditioning. I mean, we practice this over, sometimes over decades. So it's a pattern that's really anchored within us. And sometimes we also have what I call them psychological gymnastics. There are innate psychological defense mechanisms that keep us from really understanding what the truth is. Things like denial. Very often people think denial is conscious lying. It's not conscious lying. It's an unconscious defense mechanism that really sets me up to be unable to see or admit to the issue at hand, or rationalizations, which are the excuses. And very often people really believe, to a large extent, the excuses they're using not to make changes. Or then there's suppression, which is kind of my way of burying or stuffing an issue. All of these keep us prisoner to our unhealthy habits, our unhealthy choices, and they're reinforced by years of conditioning and very, very resistant to change. They reside in the unconscious, and yet they play out in our thoughts, they play out in our feelings, and they play out in our behaviors.
Well, this reminds me of the psychological reversals you and I talked about during our tapping and change episodes.
Well, exactly. And we have blinders on regarding certain behaviors, and we're unable to see clearly, what stands in the way of the realities and making the changes that really could improve our lives. Or sometimes we see the change is necessary, yet we create stories and the excuses, kind of the rationalizations I talked about, that really condone our inaction. These can be conscious, they can be unconscious. Things like, and you're going to find so many familiar here. I know I do. I don't have the time. It costs too much. I don't have the equipment or the outfit, or, oh my gosh, that makes me so uncomfortable, or I'm waiting for someone else to do it for me or to me. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Or I'm not going to succeed. I've tried it before. It doesn't work. It's not safe. I'm going to lose friends or family. I don't deserve it. I don't know what to do, or I know what to do, but I don't want to do it. That's a good one. I've used that very often. Or that I have to give up things that I like.
Yeah, I've heard them all and said quite a few myself.
Yeah, and I have as well. I have as well. The point is that our thinking brain can justify the conditioning, the beliefs, the backstory, even if it's flagrantly unhealthy, unless we consciously challenge it, and we challenge it by inquiring into what's important to us, by seeking the information, accurate information that breaks through the resistance, that tells us the truth, tells us the real solid truth. And often this is initiated, unfortunately, by very, very critical and judgmental approaches. We sometimes turn on ourselves and we get really mad at ourselves for the choices that we've been making. We can be really ugly or shaming of ourselves. And sometimes this can kind of jar us from this habitual sleepwalk, but it's not sustainable. When we've talked about self-compassion and how supportive that can be, it's incredibly important in the change process. And sometimes information, like what we provide in our conversations really impact resistances. Because it's if the information provided is simple and straightforward, doable, so that as I hear it, I can say, oh, well, I could do that.
Yeah, yes, which is why we've worked to keep things simple and straightforward and offer suggestions and techniques that are short and sweet and easy for people to do.
Well, Anna, I'm a believer, and I have been for a long, long time, in making changes incremental. It's really about starting small, setting it up so that it's believable and achievable, and really kind of moving those incremental pieces in a way that they build on each other repeatedly. The question sometimes is, how do you take down a mountain, or how do you eat an elephant sandwich? We do it incrementally, one bite at a time, one piece at a time. In small, when it's done repeatedly, when it's done consistently, can be enormously powerful.
Yeah, start with incremental changes and then practice, 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 right?
Yes, yes, yes. And one of the many resistances to change is collecting information and not utilizing it. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes we can become complacent and focus more on kind of the gathering, kind of like knowing a lot about it rather than using the information for right action. So it's about turning toward ourselves and saying, oh, yeah, yeah. And even that quote that I mentioned, knowing and not doing is not knowing. Be able to say, oh, yeah, that's what I've been doing. It's useless unless I can invest it in right action.
So, how can we best use the conversations for the good information, Dr. Jane?
Well, Anna, I think we consistently offer information and choices that support the premise that change is an inside job. It comes from the inside out. And our conversations have provided psychological explanations and scientific research to help us identify and give language to the experiences around thoughts and feelings and uh, body sensations and impulses. And the key is to take a moment and, as we receive the information, to really inquire into ourselves. Is this relevant for me? And how is it relevant for me? Um, what are my experiences, both past and present, really exemplify this? And then looking at, choices am I making that keep me stuck? What exactly is going on that keeps me in a place that isn't satisfying or isn't healthy for me? And this isn't to fuel any kind of drama. That's not what we're looking to do. It's really to promote the experience of self-discovery. It's through this kind of exploration that we have an opportunity to begin to formulate for ourselves, where we are and what might be interfering with me being who I'm truly called to be.
Yeah. And how are the techniques, how do the techniques fit in?
Well, as I say, we're starting with the inquiry and asking, who I am, what's important to me. Am I living within these aspects? What's missing? What part of me is making the choices? And then it's the exercises and techniques that support us in the change process as tools. The tools that help us both maintain that present moment awareness so that I can gather the information, I can do the self-discovery, the tools that help me balance and strengthen the energy system so that I can carry forth and really stay in the right action. And also it's about keeping the neural system calm so I can use the most sophisticated part of my brain to make solid decisions for right action. And also to feel good about it. That's also what the tools offer us, that I can maintain that positive energy and and promote conscious choice, which brings me out of the tunnel, out of the old conditioning, especially when I'm resistant to that kind of negativity. When I have tools that I can really put into operation that let that fade into the background, or when it comes up that maybe I'm being resistant, or when I lose my way, or forget myself, or forget what's most important, the tools help me come back, brings me back to that central point of I'm called to be the best I can be. And here's how I do it.
Yes, and the episodes themselves are aligned with certain aspects of the change process. They also provide information and tools, via suggestions or techniques.
Anna, you're absolutely right. And some of the episodes, like the gratitude and willingness that we talked about, the self-compassion, the acceptance, and also the courage, are really meant to inspire. And inspire is where we get the enthusiasm and where we get the energy to continue in that, or I should say, on that path of right action. It energizes the change process and really enables us that access to the connection with our best and highest selves which always want us to move in that positive direction.
Yes, and this is an exciting start to our next several conversations, our Awakening series, in which we will continue to deepen into the amazing process of change. I'm so excited to get started on that, Dr. Jane. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna.
Until our next conversation.